Welcome to the show, folks. It is Friday, and if you've made it that far, congratulations. The end of the week. One of those sexy summer Fridays where everything that can go wrong is going wrong, and we're going to have a lot of fun talking about it. I'm your host, Max Burns. For the next half hour, we are talking about the 5 biggest stories that are breaking in the news today, and we're laughing through the tears where we can. And believe me, there is a lot going on today. You can follow me on Twitter at TheMaxBurns and follow us on YouTube at Lincoln Square Media, on Substack at Lincoln Square. And as always, leave your questions and your comments right here during the show. I will try to get to all of them. I read every comment on the YouTube videos too, even though my therapist says it's permanently damaging my brain. We got a great show for you today, guys. With me today, I'm joined by the one and only Brian Karem. You know him from the Reporter's Notebook on Substack, the host of the Just Ask the Question podcast. And since today's episode deals so much with the Beltway, I couldn't imagine anybody better than DC's preeminent man about town to be with us here. Brian, how are you, man?
Oh, it's tough room, Max. How you doing? I have an ugly child too.
And we were talking right before this came on. There's news breaking even now. A big story in the Washington Post now that an ICE agent who shot and killed a man in Houston, some of the people involved in that now saying that the man who was killed did not, in fact, veer his car toward the officer. In fact, the ICE officer opened fire on these men as soon as he exited his vehicle. This is an emerging story that is still developing. We're going to stay on this. This is, believe it or not one of our 5 big stories of the week, which shows you just how jam-packed this news cycle is. Let's jump right into it. Because we're going to dig in deep here today. Our top story breaking here, Platner falls. Platner, progressive outsider Graham Platner, beat the odds when he won the Democratic nomination for Senate in Maine, despite a steady string of personal scandals. But the bad headlines finally proved to be a little too much even for Platner, who abandoned his campaign this week after a national outcry from Democrats and independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who was one of his first endorsees. Platner always was a risky bet, but Democrats really should take some time and think about what the circumstances were that brought us to Graham Platner, because a lot of it has to do with Washington Democrats parachuting into that Maine race and insulting voters by telling them they didn't know what they wanted, that they should vote for Governor Janet Mills, whether they thought she was good or not, because Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee said they should. And in response, voters got mad. They protest voted. They brought Graham Platner in. And now, with his departure, there's a scramble to replace him before July 27th. So once again, Democrats being Democrats, a must-win Senate seat against Susan Collins is once again thrown into disarray. Brian, what do you make of all this?
Well, the Democrats are the best at snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. And once again, they prove that no matter how low the Republicans go, they can go lower. Yeah, you don't preach to the electorate what it is that they should elect. You ask, that's the one thing that the MAGA, Donald Trump did, was he asked people, what is it that you want? And now, being a grifter, he played to it without ever having any care to do it. But perhaps maybe if politicians learned what the electorate wanted and provided candidates who fill the need, they'd find it easier to get elected. And that goes for both parties, but particularly the Democratic Party, who wants to preach their politics to us. And look, I'm as progressive as the next guy, but at the same time, if you're the big tent, you have to have a tent that's there for everyone. And the Republicans are very good at a selective tent. The Democrats are supposed to be the big tent. So how about you go through one thing you should do is just poll the electorate. Walk around. When it was Tip O'Neill, when he tried to get the majority back in the House, he went into individual districts across the country and asked them, who's the most popular guy here in your county? And it didn't matter if they were a politician or a salesman or the meat cutter. He found out who that was and why he was popular. And they said, listen, if you run for office, we'll support you. These are our core principles. If you can go with those, we'll work with you with, things that differ, but we want you in office. And that was very successful. But the Democrats today, and I've seen this as I've traveled across the country during this election season, still want to preach to us what's right and what's wrong, and few people are listening. And that doesn't bode well for the Democrats. Now, in some districts and in some states, they lucked into finding someone who's popular. But when they have to go searching for someone, that's when they have a problem.
Yeah. And it's easy to sort of go in and tell voters who to vote for when you're popular. I mean, it's harder when you're at the highest unpopularity in history. But Platner, you know, he had popular positions. He had a string of scandals that everyone knew about. He also has an attitude that I think challenged a lot of people in the party in ways that weren't necessarily productive. Let's play the video of him announcing that he's dropping out.
I believe that for the movement to continue, it can't be me. And for that reason, we are suspending campaign operations. This is incredibly difficult because I know that some will think it's an admission of guilt, and it most certainly is not. We're not doing it because of the allegations. We're doing it because of the structures that are being taken away from us by those in power.
It's so telling to me. I mean, there's not in any of this any sense of apology for the chaos, right? Or for any of the string of scandals. But there is this sense of defiance. He says, this is the Democratic Party taking this away from me. I mean, how do you think this plays in Maine now that they have to find a new nominee?
Well, let's start with the fact that he's still speaking in first person plural, like there's more than one person there. How about he talks about himself? You know, we, my ass, it's you. That's
Yeah.
how about you take some responsibility by the fact that you say, I'm suspending my campaign. I start there. If you could start with, you know, you're a human being. Don't talk to me like you're, you know, like there's a whole stream of people sitting behind you making this decision for you. You made the decision. At least own that. The Democrats have a chance here to, you know, I don't know, have a convention, get people from, you know, all the precincts together, draft someone that could actually win. It could be a good thing for them. On the other hand, if you look at it, this is much like how the Democrats reacted after Joe Biden, and for a different reason, but after Joe Biden did so poorly in the first debate with Donald Trump. Now, mind you, Donald Trump did no better. In fact, you could say he actually did worse, because when Joe Biden was cogent and answered questions, he gave answers to, you know, specific policies that you know, people wanted to know about. But at the end, it was two old men arguing about their golf game, and Biden looked worse than Trump, at least according to the Democrats. So the next thing you know, Kamala Harris and the upper echelons of the Democratic Party are meeting at her house in Brentwood, and they draft George Clooney to write a letter to the to the New York Times saying Joe's got to leave, and they abandoned Joe. If this were the Republican Party, they would double down on this guy and they go, no, you're pushing against him. This is our guy. This is horrible politics. This is weaponization, blah. They would invent the words to go after him, and they would keep him. I'm not saying that that's right either, but there is an opportunity here for the Democratic Party to actually reach a consensus and find someone who could defeat the Republican in the fall. They have a little bit of time to do it. I find that they will probably fail, much as they did with Kamala Harris, substituting her for Joe Biden. I think it's another Democratic failure just waiting to happen.
And this process in Maine has also turned into its own scandal. Members of the Maine Democratic Party resigning in protest because they want Platner to be able to choose his own successor. And I just want to tell them, you know, I'm sympathetic to the progressive cause, but that's not how it goes, guys. When you drop out in disgrace, you don't get to pick your successor. I mean, but Brian, what lessons, if anything, do you think Democrats can learn from this?
Well, if they could learn any lesson, it would be to listen to voters, but they haven't learned that lesson yet. And they're damn sure are demonstrating that they haven't learned anything from the Joe Biden debacle. This parallels it in many ways. Now, there is an opportunity. Will they make the most of it? Well, you want to hope that they do. Will they? Probably not. Because Democrats being Democrats, no matter how low the Republicans go, they'll go lower. As I said, we have two parties in this country. One has no heart and one has no head.
We'll figure it out eventually, Brian. Let's jump on to the next big story. And this one shocks me too, as a journalist and a writer. The end of reading. You think that people are getting dumber. It's not just in your head. The Atlantic has a horrifying news story out this week entitled "The End of Reading is Here." And it tracks what can only be described as a nightmare scenario where reading rates are falling, and not just reading, but the ability to understand a world that's defined by writing. The number of Americans who read for pleasure fell from 28% in 2004 to 16% in 2023. Only a third of high school students are proficient in analyzing text for meaning. So they can read, they just don't know what they're reading or what any of it means. And colleges, our great institutions of higher learning, are stopping assigning whole books in classes. They're meeting this concern by just assigning passages of books because students say that full books are too hard to focus on and the ideas are too complex. It makes you feel great. Now, in place of reading, more and more Americans are looking at TikTok and YouTube and video streaming, except that actually has been shown to reduce their ability to separate fact from lies, which I'm sure won't be an issue in an upcoming election. Brian, as a writer and a lover of the written word, I mean, this is horrifying.
I didn't read the article. I couldn't do it. No, it's very, look, I've written 7 books. It's frightening to me that you would, I mean, the doom scrolling alone that people do on a daily basis instead of reading a book, you know,
Yeah.
and I remember just last week when Donald Trump was talking about the Red Scare. And there was a young reporter said, this is like Ronald Reagan, Red Scare, when, you know, he was worried about Sandinistas, you know, marching across the border. And I go, no, the actual Red Scare was by Joe McCarthy in the 1950s, Tail Gunner Joe. That's the Red Scare. And this reporter looked at me and goes, what are you talking about? I never read anything about that. And I'm going, holy Jesus, Mary and Joseph. That's, you know, the ignorance of not only what happened 50 years ago, but 50 minutes ago. Our mind, everyone seems to suffer from ADHD. Nobody can sit down and read a damn book. You know what? Although we're on the internet, although we're streaming, although we're doing all of this, I recommend everybody for at least 3 hours a day, put down your damn phone and go read. Just read. The ideas, the complexities of life. Life is far more nuanced than what you're going to get in a TikTok video. So maybe, just maybe, you should put it down and read a little bit. And some of the, you know, you talk about an absence of reading. That's why newspapers have fallen. But that's also the goal of government. The goal of government, our government, for the last 50 years is to dumb down, you know, as George Carlin said, they just want you smart enough to operate the machinery. Now they don't even need that. They have AI. I know a guy who fixes refrigerators. His manager is an AI manager. What the hell has happened to actual, I don't know, education? Well, the government has killed it. And No Child Left Behind became Every Child Left Behind. They started teaching to a test. And if you're teaching passages from a book instead of a whole book, well, you really don't get it, do you? I mean, I know people who don't want to read short stories because they say they're too long. I'm going, it says short story. And you wonder why they don't understand the concept of cease fire, because they can't even understand short story. So we need to reinvest in education. We need to reinvest in the written word, because the written word, one of the things about the written word, and I've testified before Congress and legislatures, I pulled out a copy of a newspaper group that I ran for many years, an 1863 copy of the newspaper. I said, you can't hack it, you can't change it, you can't, it is today as it was then. It's a monument to that moment in history. I said, and in a court of law, that written word is finite and more valuable than anything on the internet, because I can hack any of it. To your point, it's one of the reasons why we walk around not able to distinguish fact from fiction.
Yeah. We have a comment from Call Me Old Fashioned V2 who says, just took 2 books out of my mailbox before listening to this. You're one of the rare ones. I mean, it is now, reading for pleasure is now a minority activity in America. It's
Every day.
an elite activity. And it's something that we see reflected. I mean, the thing that's so interesting in this article, I thought, was that Americans are still reading a lot. It's what we're reading that's changed. We're reading social media posts. We're reading, smaller, simpler content online that's disposable, that doesn't give context. And so, as you mentioned, we're losing our ability to think historically and to put together ideas.
Well,
so when you invade Iran, I mean, a lot of people just assume there's a reason. They don't even know how to begin to do the research to look into why that's wrong. That's a scary place to be.
When I first got into this business, they told me to write, or when I was broadcasting, to do it to a 9th grade reading level. Then pretty soon it was an 8th grade reading level, and then a 5th grade reading level. And my argument back then and my argument now is, if I only play to the floor, then the next generation, that becomes your ceiling. So each generation is a step down. God forbid, I used a word in a stand-up one time live on television. I said, the two sides have not reached amicable accords, and therefore the strike continues. When I got back to my office, my producer said, you can't use the word amicable. Nobody knows what it means. And I said, God forbid, somebody should pick up a damn dictionary and look it up. Why am I playing down? Pretty soon you're going to have us being on television going, ooh, ooh, ah, ah, to be understood. And look at TikTok, and that's exactly where we are.
It is exactly where we are. And it's not a mistake that we have the first sort of post-literate president. I mean, the president who doesn't read, who has no context of history, who, well, we'll get into this in the next one too, has no context of anything and just sort of makes it up as he goes.
How about when he got up and said, those who think that we live on land that was stolen are traitors to America? I'm going, dude, that isn't politics. That's a fact. It has nothing to do with politics. This is a fact. There were people here before us. They had the property. We took it. I don't know what else you call it but stealing. So either you can admit it and move on, or call people un-American who understand facts and the truth. And that's where we are in this post-literate America. If you do not believe what the leader tells you to believe, then you are you are not only a seditionist, but you're a traitor.
Yeah, which actually pivots nicely into our third story of the day. Another great, the leader said so we must do story. Qatar Force One and the return of Iran. Now, you remember that Boeing 747 that Qatar gave to Donald Trump as a gift? The one that cost us $400 billion of taxpayer money to fix up? Well, Trump bailed on it after a single flight due to what the Secret Service is describing as unspecified security concerns. Makes you feel good. Turns out that the Qatari 747 doesn't have all the security and safety features of the planes that are made specifically to be Air Force One. So Bribe Force One, as I'm calling it, is actually less safe than any recent presidential jet. And members of Congress, including some Republicans, even warned about this a few months ago, saying that this situation would result from Trump rushing the plane out to try and meet the America 250 deadline. So now guess what, guys? You, the taxpayer, get to pay even more money to fix this jet up again. Brian, what do you think?
Well, I think it was 400 million, not billion, because it's to refurbish it. And I remember that number because all right, Elon Musk is worth $1 trillion. 400 million to him is the equivalent of $40 to any American making 100,000 a year. So Elon Musk could have fixed this himself, and for the cost of what you and me would pay $40 for. But that aside, the idea that you would rush this into service and then lie about the reason why you had to get into the other airplane, at first telling us, well, they wanted to look at my brand new pretty airplane. And then they said, well, wait a minute, if you had to close windows. Well, you had to close yours. I didn't have to close mine. And by the way, if something happened to me, it happened to you. They're after me. So eventually he got around to admitting that there was a threat against him. Now, whether it was specific, the Secret Service said it may have not have been a specific threat, but the fact that we're at war with Iran and the Air Force One that had been in service had the countermeasures and the chaff and all the things that you need to screw up radar signatures so you don't get shot at. He didn't have that because he rushed it into service with that money. And you're right, it's going to cost probably another $400. It may end up costing $400 billion by the time they get done with it. But
you are absolutely right. It is $400 million. I was thinking $400 billion, the cost of the Iran war, which is back on part of the reason Trump was over in Europe.
Which is about worth 2,000 or 4,000 to Elon. So So it's not only is it a continuing problem, but the fact that it demonstrates once again, that our president just can't face reality and will lie about everything. Whenever he gets a chance, he's going to lie, especially if it benefits him. And in this case, putting others' lives in danger simply because he wanted a real, and look, I'll admit, I love the paint scheme. It looks real pretty. Hey, I'm all for that. I like it better than the pale blue. But how about you take the time and do it right? It's the same thing that, we had with the reflecting pool. Good Lord, every president has messed with a reflecting pool. He's the only one that's arrested people because of algae, blaming them for algae. You're arresting the sun next. Oh, wait a minute. We don't believe in science anymore. So why not? And the president who has a problem with math, remember, it's 600% cheaper to get drugs now. They're paying you to get your drugs. That moron is the one who's coming out lying to us about the jet. And the reason why it is an important story is not just the appearance versus reality aspect of it, but it demonstrates very vividly exactly how the president will abuse the pocketbook of American taxpayers to benefit him.
Yep. And I do want to jump to the next story here as we're blazing through this episode of It's the End of the Week. This is a big story that's just emerging. The NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, is now a big issue. Congressional Republicans are racing against the legislative clock to pass anything this year, including huge chunks of Donald Trump's unpopular agenda, some of his most controversial bills, the Save America Act, voter suppression legislation, because the less voters can see of the agenda, the better. So they've decided to cram it all into this National Defense Authorization Act, which is the must-pass defense spending bill that becomes a massive, massive controversy every year. One bill that found its way into the NDAA this year is the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, or CORCA. We've talked about this on the show before. It's a massive power grab by the Department of Homeland Security and ICE, hiding itself as a bill to fight retail theft. And now over 120 civil rights organizations have spoken out against including CORCA in the NDAA. A dozen Democrats, including Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, have supported CORCA, which would allow ICE to collect sensitive information about Americans who are accused of shoplifting. And there are no legal guardrails to how that data can be used, how it's stored, or where it can be shared. This is a massive civil rights violation in the making, and it's ICE that is eager to use this bill to advance Donald Trump's mass deportation agenda. Brian, do you think it's surprising that this nightmare bill is jammed into NDAA at the last minute?
No, of course not. And when Donald Trump came out last week and said that actually yesterday, he said it again, I'd be the best communist. Communism is bad, but I'd be the best communist. He's showing it with this. This is, you want to talk about communism, owning 10% of intel by the government. That's part of communism. If you want to talk about communism, it's no private life. That's, the government we're supposed to be the government, but the government doesn't treat it that way, right? Yeah. So their ability to violate your privacy, in direct contrast to the reason why we set up the U.S. Constitution, shows that Donald Trump was right when he said he'd be the best communist. He's certainly one of the best at creating a totalitarian state since George Orwell created 1984. And this is another act that moves in that direction and benefits no one but the thieves and criminals that are in ICE. A reminder, 3 people in the United States have been assassinated by members of the federal government in the last few months. Alex Pretty, Renee Good, and now Goya, the poor man whose only sin was getting up in the morning and going to work, and has lived here 30 years and put not even a traffic ticket on his jacket. No crime at all. This is all about the racism and the suppression of the Donald Trump administration and ICE's attempt to become the brown shirts for Donald Trump. The SS, the Nazi SS, lives and breathes in those mask-covered ICE agents who are going around the country shooting people indiscriminately.
And Republicans seem to know they have something bad here because they're now pushing the NDAA to a vote as early as next week, I'm hearing. This is a rapid pace. Nobody has read this. But does it surprise you at all that some of these Democrats who co-sponsor this ICE power grab are Dick Durbin, Tammy Duckworth, Amy Klobuchar, people who have had ICE in their communities? Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, where people were murdered by ICE. And yet they're supporting this bill because ostensibly they want to seem tough on crime.
Well, on my comment, my question to them who always do this is, have you read the bill? And 9 times out of 10, they haven't. They've been told what's in it by members of staff without ever actually reading the cogent parts themselves. That's how we got the one big, beautiful bill. That, by the way, is how we got the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was hurried through. It was all pieces of legislation that had been voted out of Congress on numerous occasions because it violated personal and privacy laws. All of that was passed just so that Congress could look like it was doing something in reaction to 9/11. This is Donald Trump's ginned up response to a crisis that doesn't exist on the border, while ignoring the crisis that does exist, the never-ending war that Donald Trump has started and claimed he's stopped 40 times already. The fact is, this should not. Those who support it from the Democratic end, I would urge them to read the damn thing, as unfortunately I have. And when you read through it, if there's any way, as a cogent, rational human being, capable of critical thinking, you pass this, I want to sit down and talk to you. And because I don't see that it matches A, the Constitution, B, our needs, or C, what people want. It matches what top government wants, and the appearance of looking tough on crime when in fact it legalizes crime by the government.
Yeah. And I would urge our viewers as well to contact their senators about this. If the civil rights violations and the abuse by ICE aren't enough, this bill also puts ICE in the business of handling theft prevention for major retailers like Home Depot. So it's no wonder the National Retail Federation, one of the biggest lobbyists in America, supports this bill, because suddenly taxpayers are going to be footing the bill for Walmart's loss prevention. Pretty win-win for them. What a nightmare. All right, let's jump to our last story here as we are going through. There is one senator who is not going to be voting on the NDAA. Has anyone seen Mitch McConnell?
I wrote a column on that.
I mean, the Kentucky senator, he's rushed to the hospital weeks ago for an undisclosed medical emergency. No one has heard from him. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear can't get answers. Senate Republicans can't get any answers. Republican Congressman Marlin Stutzman of Indiana said that he doesn't even know if McConnell is alive or not. That's probably pretty bad. The Senate might be the world's most elite nursing home, but there's got to be a limit here. I mean, this raises a big question for Kentuckians of, don't you deserve representation? There's now a conspiracy theory that McConnell's family's hiding this because they don't want an election that would replace him with a pro-Trump Republican. Brian, chaos as usual in Washington.
Okay, let me decipher some of this, because the first time I interviewed Mitch was when I was 17 years old. And my uncle, who knew him very well and was a colleague of his, said, before you go in to interview Mitch McConnell, you got to know one thing. He's about only one thing. And I said, what's that? And he goes, Mitch McConnell. Mitch hasn't changed in 40 years. He was a POS when he started out. I have no, good riddance to bad rubbish. I wish he'd left sooner. Personally, whatever pain him and his family are going through, I wish them well. But as far as he should have been off the public map long ago. He first came into power in Louisville, Kentucky by trying to upend the Republican. He tried an insurgents effort to take over the Republican Party. He lost that. And through all of his friends who were helping him out under the bus, he became known on the national stage with one commercial. When he ran against Dee Huddleston in 1984, he became the only senator on Ronald Reagan's exceedingly short coattails. And he did it with one commercial where he had a hunter and a bunch of bloodhounds looking for Dee Huddleston because he said Dee Huddleston never voted in Congress. That was a blatant lie. And he went from coming from behind with that commercial to winning by about 5,000 votes. Guess who made that commercial? Roger Ailes. And for the last 40 years, he has engineered a Republican Party he's the god of the Republican Party in his mindset. He's the one who created it. And that to me is the greatest irony because the Republican Party no longer likes Mitch McConnell, and they don't care where he goes. And I know you want to cue this video. You want to do it now, and I'll come out of the backside of it. But I was just going to say that Mitch McConnell, it says something about our news gathering abilities today, that we are relying on a Laura Loomer tweet, a supposition, whereas in the old age, when the Courier Journal was a powerful newspaper, there were people assigned to cover that delegation 24/7. The likes of Al Cross doesn't exist anymore. Al Cross was a great reporter for the Courier for years. He retired. He talked to Mitch maybe 6 weeks ago, but it was 4 weeks ago that Mitch went down. No one's seen him. No reporter has reported on it, and we're relying on rumors. I've heard plenty of them. Maybe he's sitting by Lake Barkley sipping mint julep while babbling like a cicada. Who knows? We don't. And we don't have the reporters left to do the job. This speaks to our lack of ability to report. It speaks to the fact that Mitch McConnell should be gone because he's been decrepit for a while. And I don't care. And the real reason why they don't want to admit it is because if they have a special election in Kentucky, Andy Barr, who won the nomination, would face off against Charles Booker, an African-American from Louisville, and everyone thinks that Andy Barr would win it. But if there is a special election, it's not necessarily true that those two would face off. It could be Thomas Massey who would run, and he's far more popular in Kentucky than Andy Barr. And thus,
now that would be something to see.
That would set up a hell of an event in November if Massey decides to run as an incumbent and maybe an independent. The Republicans could be screwed. Meantime, of course, they need the vote. So they don't want to admit that he's gone because it screws them.
So how long can Republicans keep this game going? Like, how long can they just not update on Mitch McConnell's status before this becomes an issue?
Do you remember the old Saturday Night Live trope? Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still dead.
Still dead.
They're going to try and take this, I'm sure, through the November general election. Without if he is incapacitated, we will find out about it at the very last moment, when it's inconceivable that you could put together a special election, and inconceivable that anyone could interfere with the Trump plan to put Andy Barr in place. That's when you will find out. Now, the date of that, your guess is as good as mine. But in the meantime, it still does compromise the Republic. Remember, the pushback against Donald Trump in the war came because they couldn't get a vote from the wonderful, redoubtable Mitchie and the Mitchettes. So that's where we're at.
We actually have a video of the best laid plans for Republicans' Kentucky Senate race and what they look like now. Let's play that real quick. Oh, not looking too good down there in Texas. And I'll tell you what, with that last big story, we've reached the end of the week. I'm your host, Max Burns, and as always, follow Lincoln Square on Substack at Lincoln Square. on YouTube at Lincoln Square Media. And let me know what you thought of the show on Twitter at TheMaxBurns. It's been a pleasure to have Brian Karem with us here today to break down the national breakdown. Brian, how can folks keep in touch with you?
Well, let's see. I write a weekly column for Salon. The name of the book, it's back there somewhere, is Free the Press in its third printing. You can catch me on Substack under, I think it's Reporter's Notebook. And then I'm everywhere like everybody, every other independent guy is. Just Google me. It's all there.
All right, folks, that is it for us, but you can find even more videos on the Lincoln Square Media YouTube channel. So do your patriotic duty, read an actual book, but more importantly, go start watching more content. Bye.